Hi, everyone. How was lunch? I hope it was great. Thank you for joining us. This section, I think it's very important because we've realized over the years that, as we always say in Africa, or generally, one um, policy or one change by the government can really affect how startups do businesses. And also, the government needs businesses in order to run the economy. Businesses are the ones that employ people and grow the country's GDP. So thank you very much. So I have three amazing ladies here, women in tech. And I would like to start off with them just introducing themselves and what they do, but more importantly, what they do to a layman so they know. So you also know if you who to reach out to, right? Or just how to approach them. Yeah. Over to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Aparupa Chakravarti, and I'm the director of a company called Boto Emerging Markets Group. Not quite a woman in tech. I'm an advisor, so I wear many hats, and I'm involved in a number of different sectors, including tech. But Boto Emerging Markets Group is a strategy consulting and investment advisory firm that operates at this intersection of Africa and various emerging economies around the world, the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, etc. And broadly, a big part of what we do is to facilitate the exchange of investments, opportunities, partnerships, and knowledge between African economies and these other emerging markets. We advise the private sector, really across the spectrum, from startups and SMEs to much larger corporations, but a big part of what we focus on is around expansion and growth and helping businesses get to that next level. We also, and this is what's germane to this conversation today, we also work with governments, helping them figure out how best to work with the private sector and navigate those relationships. And finally, we also work and advise development institutions on similar problem sets around how to get the private sector more meaningfully involved in their interventions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, Daniel. So my name is Azra Fredericks, and I'm from Westgrow. Westgrow is the official trade, tourism, and investment promotion agency for the Western Cape and the city of Cape Town. And we are funded by government. And what our mandate is to, specifically with my portfolio, I'm in the tech portfolio, which sits in the investment promotions unit. And our mandate is to facilitate FDI, so businesses and investments that want to take place in the Western Cape and the city of Cape Town, but also businesses that are looking to grow that are already in the Western Cape and the city. And so just to be very, very clear, we are facilitators. And I think that's very important because we are funded by government. We don't kind of take commission from businesses that we work with or partner with or assist with. And we are also not funders, but we can assist in directing you to whether it's government funding or private funding to assist your business to grow. So that's just
All
an
right.
overview of us.
Awesome. Facilitator. All right. Over to you, Matsu.
Thank you so much. So I am Matsi. I wear a couple of hats. First one being a founder. So I have my own company. It's called Furaha Africa Holdings. And we are in skills training and skills development. I'm an entrepreneurship activist. So I do a lot of work in the policy reform space in South Africa, heading the South African Startup Act movement, which is a mission to reform policy for high impact, high growth startups. I am also an investor. I've invested in a Pan-African fintech company called Conclusion. And then lastly, I sit on a couple of boards locally and internationally. But I think the one particular board that would be like a government hat would be the Technology Innovation Agency, which is a Section 3A agency of the country, reporting directly to the Ministry of Science and Technology. And we are responsible for South Africa's technology and innovation from a financial and non-financial assistance. So being the chairperson, I am quite an independent, but I think because I am a founder, I am an investor, and I also have a sense of what governance looks like. It's a good place to be in because I'm able to represent the thoughts, the views of what the girl and the boy on the ground challenges are and how can we as a country assist them from a government perspective.
All right. Thank you very much, Matsi. And I think I'll just start with you because, hey, it looks like you wear many hats. But let's start with the TIA hat. So you are an operator, and then you're also with helping the government also do this. I'm curious, before you got into the role, I'm sure you had like a perspective of what it would be like helping facilitate this better transformation in the space. And what's your experience been like in the past year since you've been chairing the TIA in terms of helping startups? Yeah, what's the experience been like? Have there been, you expected this, it was different? Is it more difficult than you thought? Why, if so?
Yeah, it's a different space. So being a founder, you have different challenges, right? And then being a government that's trying to assist founders, but you're stuck in a system, in a bureaucratic system. You also don't have a sense of understanding of what the man or the woman on the ground needs. So understanding is the first thing. So understanding, why does government work the way it does? For us on the ground, it's important to understand, right? But also for government at the top, it's how do you understand their real challenges? So, for example, if we're going to have a Ministry of Small Business Development, let's have a minister that's actually run a small business themselves from the ground up. That's had to register it, that's had to grow it, that's had to get funding so that they can expand, that's had to get international investors so that they can scale globally. Because in that understanding, you're able to identify the challenges and say, how do I then, as a government, create policy that doesn't create roadblocks, create policies that makes our small businesses attractive to the rest of the world. I mean, South Africa has a lot of potential, but our policy environment means that we need to go and register our intellectual property somewhere else. So I think there has to be a meeting of the minds between the two. I'm happy that I understand what's happening on the ground, but then I'm also getting to learn about what are the challenges. And the good thing is that there is political will to change. I mean, some of the activities that are now happening at TIA, for example, we are actually one of the sponsors for this wonderful initiative, Africa Arena Conference. We were also sponsoring the Innovation Summit. We are going to be attending COP, ensuring that South African green technology innovators and the work that we do in supporting green technology innovators is recognized from a global perspective. So there is that change, but for that change to happen, you have to have people that understand what's happening in the top and what's happening in the ground, and then hopefully create that bridge between the two, because in the absence of that, we'll continue to do things and nothing will really help this country.
All right, awesome. That's a very useful point, because so I'm from Nigeria, and we have this running joke where when it's time to select ministers, it sort of doesn't matter the background, what they study. Someone can study geology, and he can be like the minister for, I won't say finance, but it could be minister for works or just something really funny. And you're like, how does it work, right? But so yeah, I guess it's a common challenge where some of this appointments, in a sense, are done, there's a political tilt to it as opposed to getting like technocrats. But thank you very much. And it's very useful to hear that while I'm sure the startup world wants, TIA to do more, but just by even sponsoring this, it's helpful, right? Because maybe this wouldn't be happening fully if it didn't. So thank you very much. So for you, Aparupa, I know earlier when we were speaking, you had mentioned the fact that businesses and government, they speak different languages. Right, so I'm curious, it would seem like, the government should want one thing, businesses should want, it should be aligned because they all want the country to be better. But just curious from your experience, what's this different language they speak?
I think it's a combination of things. I think a part of it stems from some level of misperception, dare I say mistrust, on either side. And so there's some assumptions that the private sector makes about governments, how they function, what their motivations are, and how they enact those motivations, as well as what their attitudes are towards the private sector. And on the flip side, the government also has made some assumptions about the private sector along those same vein. And for whatever reason, and the reasons are really multifarious, those things tend to lead to some degree of disconnect. I also think from our experiences working in various parts of Africa, as well as in other emerging economies, there tends to be this dichotomous view of what a government can do vis-a-vis the private sector. So it's either get out of our way or give us avenues to lobby for specific policy or specific types of change that make sense to us. And there's an entire spectrum of possibility in the middle somewhere there of co-creation, collaboration, and not just either a top-down directive or a completely like, let's just get out of the way and let the private sector do whatever they want, which is also not the right extreme to go down. And there's some really interesting examples of ways in which we can rethink these relationships coming from other parts of the world. I think Taiwan is absolutely fascinating in this regard. Taiwan, due to a few sort of reasons in recent history, they've completely rethought not just the technology industry, but the role of technology in public-private relationships. They created something called V-Taiwan, or Virtual Taiwan, which is effectively a digital space for co-creation of solutions between the public and the private sector. And it's really amazing what they have been able to achieve. What are some things that would be fit for purpose and contextualized to the African context, where we can see that kind of collaboration and that kind of innovation in regulation, in policymaking in and of itself, rather than just thinking about how do we regulate innovation, which is a bit of an oxymoron as it is.
Yeah, thank you very much. While I was speaking, I was thinking about, so just to be more specific, how do businesses think about the government? Because I think it seems a bit straightforward where it's like, the government is supposed to provide an enabling environment, while I know that sometimes the governments will look at business and I'm like, hey, you want to just, you want to like disrupt everything. So I'm curious, like specifically, what perspectives have you seen? Just to be clearer, so that people here would know. Some people here might even have some of those notions about what the government can do, and so just to get more granular.
I think there's a level of linearity. So I don't want to get into the whole trope around corruption, because I think that's overstated, overdone, and we understand what those challenges are, I think, at this point quite well, at different degrees in different parts of the continent. So I don't want to go down that particular rabbit hole. But I think there's a certain like linearity in terms of how these things are looked at. So they'll think about engaging with government from the perspective of tenders, from the perspective of like very specific procurement processes. And part of that is not on the private sector. Part of that is also on the government for not necessarily opening up other channels and avenues for different types of engagement. And I think it's particularly difficult if you're, say, a middle layer of business. So the big dogs, they have access, right? If you're a big business, you're multinational, you have a certain amount of economic sway, you'll be able to access the government at a very, very high level. But if you're a middle layer, you're a mid-sized company, you're probably local, you're probably doing quite well, but those avenues to really kind of engage government meaningfully that isn't sort of in this linear manner, I think those are either not present or not well known enough to be tapped into.
Thank you. I mean, the big dogs have access. All right. Well, any big dog here? Well, if you have, then we just tap into your access. But well
No
said.
problems.
Well said, actually. And yeah, you said we need facilitators. And Azra, you've said you're a facilitator. She's told me countless times, I'm not the government. So from your line of work, in terms of just what you've done with your tech portfolio, what would you say? I guess you help facilitate access, right, for those who are the small dogs, right? So what's it been like actually, and also what's been the response from the startups? Just knowing that, hey, it's possible for these things to work out, right?
Okay, great. So I think there's two kind of parts to it. I think from big businesses coming into South Africa wanting to set up, Westgrow's role would then be to connect them to our one-stop shop. So Invest SA is a national body, and Westgrow has partnered with the Western Cape branch. And the one-stop shop is a place where you can have access to the Department of Home Affairs, SARS, SIPSI, and you are able to then set up meetings to then set up and register your business in the one-stop shop in one kind of setting, as opposed to doing this kind of long, tedious process that can take quite a long time. So I think for big businesses and for startups, that's kind of a really good entry point into helping businesses just to go through the documentation of like, what is BEE? Do I apply for BEE? How does it work? If I'm not working with government, do I need to be compliant? How does all of that kind of play out? So I think that's kind of the first stop, is for both big and small and medium-sized businesses, that's kind of our first point of entry into the Western Cape. And then in terms of big businesses and also startups setting up in the Western Cape, our role within Westgrow is then to facilitate the operational setup. So whether that's, meeting with recruitment agencies to kind of get into your staffing or property in terms of finding a good space for you. I think that's kind of where we go to. And also if you need access into different stakeholders, whether it's peer-to-peer companies or agencies that focus on tech talent like DigiLink or Capacity that are building tech talent, we can have access and bring those into a room to connect you to them. So I think that's kind of what we do. It's our bread and butter really, to connect businesses of various sizes to markets that they and agencies that they may not, and institutions that they may not have access to.
Awesome. It sounds very simple, but while she was talking, I remember before the World Bank shelved its ease of doing business reports, I think the report used to say something about it takes 3 or 7 days to set up a business in Nigeria, and I could swear that it doesn't take that. It's not that fast, right? I'm like, in what world does this happen? Because it's always very complicated, and then you're talking to this person, and then you have to settle this person. And of course, if you're not strong-willed, why go through all this stress? So that idea of one-stop shop, it sounds very appealing. We could use that in Nigeria. Really, I don't know about other African countries, but I don't think we have that. And it will really help because you want to start and then you don't know who to, how to, and like I said, access. And it's either you're tossed to and fro, or you just say, you know what, I just start. When they come, I'll settle, right? Which doesn't help. So I think that's really a clever one. I don't know how many other African countries have that, but that's...
Rwanda.
Okay, Rwanda has
Yep.
that? Any other?
Active.
Yeah, so...
Mauritius,
Oh, cool. Oh, yeah, Mauritius. Everybody, Mauritius.
Tunisia,
Oh, cool.
Senegal.
Kenya.
Wow. Anybody know anyone else here? Any country that has a one-stop shop? Yeah?
Rwanda, we said
yeah.
Rwanda.
Cool. 7 days. Wow, that's good. That's good. And no countries that don't have. I guess it's the rest. So, but definitely, I think it's very, very important because then you start getting fines and all of that, and hey, it could have been avoided. But thank you very much. I think that's something I'm definitely going to ask. Maybe there is, but we don't know. But then it will be a problem if there is, and then we don't know that it exists in Nigeria. That's a problem. Yeah. So to you, Mati, I know that more recently there's been startup acts everywhere. Recently, we just passed ours in Nigeria, in Senegal.
Yeah.
That's, I think DRC is about to pass theirs too. Kenya, Tunisia, yeah. So, how do you see this movement? Do you think it's meaningful? Do you think it will cause a change? Because I recently spoke to a skeptic who's like, nah, it's not going to do anything. How do you see this?
Well, we're not doing it because we're not going to have impact. Otherwise, why are we doing this, right? Somebody's got to do the hard work. Somebody's got to do the convincing. Has to create that bridge between us on the ground as startups and the government. And it's been quite a long time. I've been at this since 2014 when we released a white paper that says, government, here are the set of policies we need you to either put in place or reform. 2014, only in 2022 did we get the government's attention, 2021, 2022. And all this time, we've been having conversations amongst ourselves as a startup community versus having conversations with those who are tasked to actually help us, which is the government. So I can say that this is progress because now the government is on the table. We've been engaging with the Minister of Science and Technology. We've also been engaging with the Department of Science and Innovation. We've also been engaging with the Department of Small Business Development. So for the first time, we are engaging policymakers around our challenges. The biggest challenge with us is with the National Treasury because they're the ones that are now creating incentives for people to invest in high growth, high risk startups. They're the ones that are creating barriers such as exchange control, so that if we are having to take out our intellectual property to scale our businesses so that international investors can invest in our businesses, we have to deal with what you call exchange control, which a lot of don't have. But South Africa, post 1994 has retained exchange control because people are trying to be very preservative. They're trying to ensure that capital doesn't, flow in and out without us knowing where it's going, how it's going to South Africa. So those are very archaic measures, and they're not very progressive. So National Treasury, if we were to shift that, people would see that South Africa is ready for business. And then also our ability to attract talent. I mean, our business visa as a Nigerian, I've been to Lagos a lot of times. I have a lot of Nigerian friends. For you guys to come to South Africa, it's like pulling a tooth out of your mouth, right? You have to wait for months and months on end. If you have a meeting with investors, with a portfolio company that happens next week, as a Nigerian, it'll be very difficult for you to actually come in. And that is the same with a lot of countries. So look at beautiful Cape Town. A lot of technology entrepreneurs want to live in South Africa, want to co-create with the South African ecosystem, but it's very hard for them to get. So this year, the president did announce that they will put in place a startup visa. And it's a function of what we've been doing and saying since 2014. So this is now nearly, and now there's for once an announcement that we've got a business visa that we need to fix, but also we're introducing a remote working visa and a startup visa. So unfortunately for us, I know Nigeria and Tunisia have gotten a lot of progress with your startup bill. Tunisia got their startup act within 3 years. For us, it's been a longer journey, but also recognizing that some of these policies already exist. So the business visa does exist, but it's how do you ensure that it does represent the high impact, high growth community? Because we're not just normal businesses. We, innovative. We invest a lot in intellectual property. We need a lot of investments from local and international investors. So we have to be treated in a certain way. So for once now, we have been recognized as a startup community of high innovation, high impact, lots of investments in research and development, lots of investment in intellectual property. We need to have investments. So I think for me, I am an optimist because, like I said, I wear many hats and I know what happened on the ground, what the challenges are. And I now know that if we cross that bridge and create the contact between government, we should not see them as enemies, guys. We really need to engage them as people that have never really started businesses, but now let's bring them into our world and tell them that the benefits for unlocking some of this would really impact South Africa's economy, remove unemployment, poverty, and inequality, because those are the 3 elements that government is focused on. So support the small, the startup community.
Thank you very much. She said, look at beautiful Cape Town. More people, more startup would like to stay here. And I said, yes, that's true. It's my first time here, and I'm like, I could stay here more, actually. Yeah, just beside the beach.
Just don't overstay your visa.
Yeah, actually, I could visit more. Yeah, yeah. So definitely, I agree. Looking forward to when that happens, so that I'll pack my bags. But thank you very much. So for you, Azra, I know that you're the facilitator, and while she was talking, I saw you nodding your head. It's like, yeah. So I'm curious. Still on the startup act or startup build. How do you see in your own role? Does this make things better in terms of the role you do, and what's your perception on it?
I think in terms of the Startup Act movement, it's incredibly important. When we've been speaking to startups and businesses over the last couple of weeks, a lot of their thing has been visas. How do we get in? How do we register our business here? Investment isn't going to come into the province. If you register a business in South Africa, you have to register it in Mauritius or in the US or in Europe. And so I think acts like this and movements like this are essential in getting government on board to what's actually happening in society, in reality. I think a lot of government policies and kind of government departments are still focused on a lot of traditional methods, so education can kind of fit into that as well. Just there's very traditional methods of doing things. There's in regards to visas, there's very traditional visas, business visas, company visas, and I think that movements like this are critical in creating but there's fintech now, there's edtech, there's technology, and people are working in environments that are completely different to what they were 20, even 5 years ago. And I think with COVID, it kind of rapidly increased that idea of working remotely, working from home, not needing to be at your office in a building from 9 to 5. You now have the ability, and it's led to this semigration movement of people moving from Johannesburg and Durban into Cape Town to work at the beach, to work, you know,
Yeah.
from the wine farms. And I think that, you know, it's really important for government to get on board and kind of understand that. And I think just from a Westgrow perspective, our Premier of the Western Cape and our CEO, Ronel Stander, took a trip into Europe a couple of months ago, and their focus was kind of connecting that, like what is happening on the ground and how can we kind of enable that ecosystem to be better for the Western Cape and the city of Cape Town.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very insightful. Definitely useful to touch base with what's happening in the ecosystem. And yeah, definitely it would be great to work, I mean, from the beach. I mean, we have beaches in Lagos, but it would be nice to work from this one here. Yeah, it has a different feel to it. So before I get to you, move on to you, Aparupa, any questions from the audience? Anyone have a question? Awesome.
Thank you. Hi, this is the question to all three, and I'm looking for ideas, suggestions, or examples. I love the concept of public-private. That almost makes you a B2G company. Often the government is your customer. The difficulty is, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, as you said, of corruption, but I want to acknowledge it. And the problem often occurs when you want to get investment. Overseas investors hear about you're doing a B2G company or you're growing a business, a product for the government, and they think it's like poison. They just do not want you to have your biggest and maybe your only customer as a government. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but I have to acknowledge it. Do you have any suggestions, ideas, or examples on how to kind of reduce that fear and to get investors to say, okay, I now feel comfortable in a partnership and investing in a business in an African government or an African startup?
Sure, yeah, ne? That's a very hard one, and I think it's a very valid fear, very valid concern. I mean, as a founder of my own company, the last thing I want to do is base my business model, my income model on having government clients, unless it is a specific request from the government to me saying, we require this because we struggle to find it anywhere else and you can do it, sure. But for me to go through the whole tendering, I don't know if you know the whole go to tender, request for proposals, it's a losing match. You know that they've already pre-selected their service providers, it's just a technicality for them. So those are some of the challenges that we really do have to clear up. And then also payment from government. You know, people do have a concern around these guys are not going to pay us within the 30 days that they've declared they will do. They will not pay you within 30 days. So it is a challenge, and I think these are some of the things that we do address with the government, but one challenge at a time, right? And let's get the key important things such as removing certain barriers, and then once we've been able to move from that is, okay, right, now let's go to things such as procurement, transparency, inability to pay suppliers, especially small suppliers, on time. Unfortunately, it is an uphill for small businesses.
I think two things from a Westgrow perspective. The first one is, and I touched on it earlier, kind of bring government and government agencies and initiatives to the table to speak to business. So the Premier's trip with our CEO, Ronel Stander, to Europe was to do that. It was to have conversations with VC funds across Europe to say, South Africa's open for business. We're a great place to do business. We have an incredible ecosystem for tech businesses, for tech talent. Come and set up your business here, whether it's a partnership with another VC in South Africa, or whether it's setting up, you know, your South African branch. So that's the first point. The second point is, I think Matsi touched on it in terms of the tender process. I think there's another way to do partnerships and another way to do collaborations that is not necessarily kind of involving tenders and that kind of thing. So within Westgrow, we have the Air Access Unit. So what the Air Access Unit is a collaboration between private and public sector. So Western Cape Government, City of Cape Town, but also DHL, V&A Waterfront, and they fund this unit which focuses on route access for airplanes and flights direct to Cape Town. And just to touch on that, they have just had, they deliver 22 airline flights into Cape Town, and that's 195 flights in Cape Town each week, which is 3 times higher than COVID. And that just that collaboration between private and public sector, having a unit or a completely separate entity that functions and is privately funded, publicly funded, I think that's, for me, a better way to kind of work into and kind of go away from that corruption idea, because you're funding this project, they are completely separate people involved, they're experts in that field, because the air access unit are complete experts in their industry, and have them run, I think is a good way to do that.
So at the core of risk aversion amongst foreign investors looking at the African continent, especially those who are unfamiliar with the continent, is an issue around perception. And I think we've come a really long way in terms of demystifying some things about African countries, African economies, but unfortunately, biases and misperceptions do persist. And I think one big thing is to be very systematic and persistent in countering those negative perceptions. And the only way that you can do that is to build a counter narrative. So celebrate successes, highlight successes, don't just talk about what's going wrong, let's talk about what's going right. And anywhere you look on the continent, there's a lot that's going right. And I think, psychologically, people tend to focus on the negative over the positive as it is, and we have to work that much harder to make sure that the negative outcomes are not overwhelming the positive ones. So I think that's one big thing. And then the other big thing is, if you are advising investors to come in and work with certain African governments, I think it's important to present a balanced view and also be solution-oriented. Not every government is the same. Not every government is going to present the same kinds of challenges. And there's going to always be ways to mitigate risk. What are those ways, and what will be effective for that particular country in that particular context? I think a combination of the pragmatic with the narrative is probably the best way forward.
Can I ask a question? What is an example of a country that's been able to balance the public-private procurement process well? If there's an example, because I don't feel that it's a South Africa only problem or an Africa only problem. I think there are some Western and Eastern countries that have similar issues. But if there is a case study of this is how they've been able to do it, create transparency and flow, I would be happy to follow that and say from a government perspective, let's study this particular country because they've been able to do it. Do you have an example?
Sorry, I'm taking it from the startup angle. I don't know what regulation and procedure is followed in what would be a highly trustworthy system. I don't know that. I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah, so I don't think it's a South Africa issue or
no,
just
I don't
an
think
Africa
it's
issue.
exclusive. I think what was very telling, though, was the first words out of your mouth. I wouldn't do it. That's what you said.
I was reflecting on the reality,
You're
and
right.
I'm not gonna.
No, and
I'm
that's
gonna have to be
absolutely true.
honest about the reality.
No, you're right, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but it is so hard because if you want to do these lovely ideas in the PPP, the public-private partnership, getting financing is quite difficult. And I like your ideas, thank you. But it is a long, hard struggle.
Yeah, it is.
To get them around not going down that rabbit hole of corruption. The one thing that's hard, and I don't want to go on and on, there's lots of people here, but that journey to get better takes a long time.
Yeah.
And the reputation takes a long time. So I appreciate your attempts. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. It sure is a long, hard struggle. And yeah, we're on it. Hopefully by next time we meet, there'll be progress and there'll be examples of countries that have somewhat helped fine-tune that balance. Thank you everyone for listening. This has been great. Come to the end of this session. All right, on to the next section. All right, bye for now.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.